Hey there, it's your insider, Sindy Thomas, welcoming you into Season 2 of the Insiders Career Club. Our podcast helps job seekers succeed in their career search. We share information on different careers, and we keep those employed in the know with timely career news and advice. As an in-house talent acquisition recruiter, manager, and director, I've interviewed thousands of candidates and worked with managers to fill their positions. In over 25 plus years, I've witnessed firsthand numerous candidates fail, whether it was on their resumes or in their interviews. But you can succeed by getting help from a professional, from someone who's been on the inside. Me. Understand what employers look for in their candidates. Listen to the podcast regularly, and you can learn a lot. Our website, www.insiderscareerclub.com, has free resources for your job search. Now, for those who are serious about succeeding, you can sign up for personalized career services. We'll tailor it specifically to you to help you land that great position. Hey there, insiders. It's my pleasure to introduce you to a former colleague of mine. His name is Brad Burris, and he's been a managed care leader in the biopharmaceutical industry for 32 years. He's currently Senior Director of Government Accounts at Pear Therapeutics, and previously he's been a Director of Government Accounts at GPT, a National Account Executive with Actelion Pharmaceutical, and has worked at both large and small companies, including GSK and Intermune. He has a BS/BA from Appalachian State University and an MBA and MHA degrees from Pfeiffer University. He's married to a pharmacist and enjoys spending time with family. Favorite pastimes of both include golf, but most of their time away from work is spent with two energetic sons in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. Let's welcome Brad in. Welcome to the Insiders Career Club podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you very much for having me.
I'm really glad to have you here. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Let's do an easy start. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you are from and a little bit about you?
Okay, happy to do it. Thank you very much, Cindy. I appreciate that. I am Brad Burris. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I've been in pharmaceuticals pretty much my entire career. So I've hit the highs and the lows of big companies, small companies, startups, orphan disease, things like that. And that's professionally kind of where I've been. I am married to a pharmacist, two young boys, 12 and 15, who are into everything outdoors and just having a ball here in the Triangle right now.
Wow, sounds like it. I bet them say that they are young. They probably think they're old.
Well, they do. They offer me plenty of advice. I'll say that. So we're getting into that part of life.
They're not a little kid. Exactly. So what made you decide to go into the healthcare industry?
In college, and I went to Appalachian State undergrad, I was at an apartment complex where I lived across the street from the hospital. And I had some free time like a lot of college students do. And I said, maybe I can go over and get a job at the hospital. It seems like some people I could network with, make some alliances with, maybe learn a few things. And it just seems like kind of a unique job. So I got a job as an orderly, which really rarely exists anymore. Mostly it defaults to nurses and CNAs in a hospital, but I was an orderly. And with that, I met a number of reps, and they just seemed to have a really good life, very go-getter type people, highly motivated. And I just liked that. And I gravitated towards it. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to be a part of it and really help in that aspect of healthcare.
Okay. So you did end up starting your career, just what you referenced. So you started your career in sales. How did being in sales prep you for being in the role that you're in now in managed markets, government accounts?
Relationship building is something that I've always focused on because I enjoy that. I'm like you, Cindy. I could talk to a signpost. So, I mean, I just enjoy meeting new people. And when I was trying to get into pharmaceuticals, it was a much different era. I mean, there was less regulation, fewer companies, and there were fewer people doing it. It was kind of competitive. So I built up a little resume on the back of a business card and got a job waiting tables at a a fancy restaurant in Raleigh that a lot of pharmaceutical companies had dinners at. And I just met people and I would say, hey, if you wouldn't mind, please take a look at this resume. It's abbreviated, but I think it's something that would align with what you're trying to do as a mission with your company. And I love talking to people. I think you can teach me the rest. What do you say? And the first company I went to work for was Glaxo. And that was Glaxo before Burris Wellcome, before SmithKline. It was just early Glaxo. And I got tremendous training at Glaxo, just the nuts and bolts of feature and benefits and working your way into conversations with people, understanding who's on the other side of the desk, what they're up against every day. And the one or two things I wanted to get across may not be important to them that day. So you got to always bring value to the conversation, be a resource, and make it as fun as possible. Because, we spend an inordinate amount of time at work. And for me, it's like, if I can sell something, I love the sense of accomplishment. That win is what drives me. But at the same time, I look back and say, what am I proud of? I'm proud of the relationship building and the unique people I've met along the way that are charged with a different level of responsibility than I am. I'm selling something based upon a package insert. These guys have life and death in their hands, and I want to help them have the ability to do the best job they can in the short amount of time they see patients.
Great. Would you share for listeners what managed markets is within a company?
Sure. It's probably a little bit varied at each individual company that you go to based upon where you're at and what your category and book of business that your focus on would be. But really, it comes down to just a sustainable reimbursement model for what product or service that you're selling. On the sales side, if you talk a doc into using your product, that's great. But if the patient, the one who's going to benefit or maybe not benefit from the product based upon how the profile presents to the physician, if they can't get access to something because of expenses or access to a specialist or their insurance doesn't cover something, that's a big problem. And I recognized that along the way. And I said, you know what, I think I can inflect on that. And my whole goal was to have a broad network of people that I could call on and do that job as best as humanly possible and make it easier for the patient side of the equation. And it turns into, more relationship building because it easily in market access, when you're talking reimbursement and access to expensive therapeutics, a lot of times it turns transactional. And I didn't want that. I've been fortunate to work for great companies that have a great value prop for the physician and a great solution for a number of different disease categories for patients. Putting those two together and allowing the conversation to lead over into how is this relationship going to allow me to get my message across to the person prescribing is one thing. But if I can inflect on a different part of the market and help maybe a marginalized population get the help they need, regardless of what their finances at home look like. I knew at the end of the day, when I'm sitting on the porch, 75 years old, sipping iced tea, that's probably what I'm going to be most proud of. And that's how we met. When I went to GBT in South San Francisco, I was like, you know what? Sickle cell is an area that I know is different than coughs and colds. And that's something I want to sit back and be proud of when I'm kind of reflecting on my career. And 32 years would be a career for a lot of people, but I got some gas in the tank. I want to keep going and do some more interesting things.
I understand that. So can you share with us a little bit more about what you do when you're coordinating the government affairs? So your job is really very intricate. It has a lot of moving parts. And the parts are they're big parts to maneuver. So you're working in government affairs, but you're also working with lobbyists, and there's some advocacy activity as well. Can you share a little bit about that?
Oh, of course. They're all multifactorial resources that you have to use to be successful at the end of the day when you're dealing with these huge entities like Medicaid, Medicare, all the policy-driven decisions that are made, or if you're in the commercial market and you're working with people that have pretty much unlimited resources to put towards utilization management, how they restrict and make sure the right patient's getting the right drug, they're not paying too much for it, they're accommodating rebates. It all factors in. And the pieces that you talked about, they are the core to being successful in a market access role, such as government affairs or government account management. Part of that is the government affairs piece, which does include lobbyists and the policy side of setting criteria, allowing for state statutes to be a little bit more open towards access in different populations, making sure that your Medicaid and your uninsured populations can access products based upon the clinical decisions that are put before them. They have finite amounts of money and they can't spend it just recklessly. They have to, it looks like a large pile of money to the general public, but at the end, they've got a huge responsibility and a huge number of beneficiaries that rely on them to make prudent decisions based upon clinical efficacy and the safety of the patient. Because if the product doesn't work the way it's supposed to in each and every patient, there's costs associated with that in terms of hospitalizations and ER visits. And you want to reduce all that if you possibly can. It's just better lifestyle for the patient. But the advocacy piece comes in where if you have lobbyists and you have legislators that are telling their downstream clients and their downstream employees on the healthcare side that this sounds like a good idea for the constituents, and the features and benefits of the product make the clinical decision pretty easy as well. Still, it's hard to implement and get them to move because they're doing 1,001 things. A lot of times these individual account managers have one or two products on their plate, and they're trying to make that a priority and set that as a hook. And some of the best testimonials come from certainly physicians, pharmacists, nurses that would spend some time in front of a P&T or a deciding body, a state Medicaid program, for example. But also, these deciding entities need to hear from advocacy. They need to understand the whole ball of wax from a transportation type situation in, say, rural Georgia, or if you're in rural Texas and you don't have a specialist that you need to go to and your child's sick. All of these things need to be accounted for and accommodated when decisions are being made. And that's in addition to the clinical piece. So it really works well as a chain if every link is kind of syncing together and working together, and somebody's got to coordinate that. And that usually falls to an account manager of some sort. And that's what I do for the company I'm with now. And it's interesting, Cindy, because this is a new burgeoning area of healthcare. The digital therapeutics are something that's novel and innovative, but it's not for everybody. So we have to really meet people where they're at educationally and have that impetus to help them understand and make sure our excellence is not episodic. We want to maintain that as highest level possible for one reason. We want to give them, well, actually two reasons: give them good information and give them a reason to see you again. There's a level of trust that just can't be broken and can't be taken lightly.
Okay. Well, yeah, you're right. We're on a new curve within, well, I guess it's kind of getting to be passé now because it's been around for the year or a little longer since the pandemic, right? Having doctor visits online or on the phone, but not everyone has a cell phone, and then not everyone has a computer. So it tends to fall along the lines of the socioeconomic category of where you fall, whether or not you have a phone or a computer where you can do your doctor visit online. And then even if you do have it, you may not understand the technology that well. So
that's exactly right, Cindy. You bring up a great point. And I would say that, that conversation happens every day in my world. How do we embrace technology? Because telemedicine has really been a focal point because of COVID. And you would think people kind of naturally align to that. And some do. And a large majority do. But the ones that may not have access to a phone or a tablet or Wi-Fi even, they need help as well. And fortunately, we are seeing our government and the current administration is responding to that in a fashion that hasn't been done before, because there's not really been a need this critical before. Their HHS make statements every day about, opening up access to Wi-Fi, and not just for school-age children, but for people, critically ill that are chronically ill, that are our parents' age. And, they don't do much more than email. They need to be able to get on a Zoom and understand exactly, when and where, what button to push and how it's going to help them. And it's just like an office visit, and they get to do it from the comfort of their home. We're in really very innovative times for sure.
It's amazing. I mean, and from the aspect of being in HR, I remember when all this happened and we were thinking, okay, so how are we going to continue to do our work, right? And so we made the switch to doing all of our interviews online. So yeah, I mean, business really had to make that switch. It's been very interesting to see what sticks and what doesn't. Online interviews are not going away.
It's a good point you're bringing up. Also, I hadn't really thought about the alliance between what you do and what I do. But when it gets down to it, it's trust. Because, a couple interviews, everybody can put on a good face. On Zoom, it seems to be easier to do that, but you have to be able to read the signals of how interested is this candidate. And it's the same thing with my customers. How passionate and how genuine do you come across? Because there's a certain element of trust that you don't want to breach, because you may not get another chance. You may not get a third interview. We're in a different cycle of business for sure.
Absolutely. So you've been working, like you said, on the pharmaceutical or therapeutic side. Could your job flip and be on the governmental side as well?
Yeah, it's kind of a stepping stone in most career paths to start in sales, maybe have a little stint as a district manager, something like that, working with people and understanding that you have careers in your hands and you want to help develop people and you have to manage your own career and keep a fine running machine going all at the same time. But it does prepare you. And you need those ups and downs in career. You need those challenging times to make you stronger and more adept at dealing with challenges. And that's really the role I'm in now, is using that, because we're all in sales. You're all always trying to meet people, and whether you agree to it or not, your opinion is your opinion, and you generally want people to align with that. And sometimes you put the sales hat on and say, no, here's the reason why you should listen to this as well. And I do think that that's the trust part of the conversation, where if you don't have that passion, that initiative in the conversation, people realize that quickly. And you don't have that mundane kind of monotone messaging. You need to be inspired by what you do. And you look back on your career path and all those traits and skill sets that you work cross-developmentally with other departments in your company, or courses that you take in, or just a school of hard knocks, build you to where you need to be. And in the pharma world, this built me to understand the relationships and the insights and the business imperatives from the insurance world, either governmental or commercial, to say, oh, okay, this is not all about what Brad wants. This is not all about what my company wants. It's got to jibe with people to create a win-win scenario. And I know that's kind of a tired old saying to say win-win, but it really holds true in a lot of regards, where you're trying to get your product in the hands of doctors that can save lives and open up access so patients of all socioeconomic strata in life can afford it and have access to it. And, sometimes you have to go through legislators or people that, make big decisions on a daily basis, and you have to make what you're selling a priority to them. So going back to the early days of the training I got at Glaxo, to the small startup companies where you really have to struggle and do 7 or 8 jobs where you're used to doing one job, it builds a better product at the end of the day. And I think that's why I feel like I do a good job in the government relations, government account management role that I'm in now, because you fall back on what you know and what you understand to be the imperatives, and you kind of understand the other side of the desk more than what they expect you to. And if you don't come in just so one-sided, I think that does build a relationship and build trust and move towards more of a symbiotic relationship, to say, I've got something that could help you. May not help all your patients, all your constituents or beneficiaries, but it'll help some. And you sell it from that standpoint. And that's the art of the long run for me.
Okay. Now, Brad, as I understand it, also part of what you do is you're working with the actual agreements between companies, like with rebates and how much they're going to charge for the product or whatever. What are some of your biggest challenges when you are negotiating? Well, we want to do this. This is our product. It's great. That's one thing. But it's actually coming down to the dollars and cents of it, because the hospital or the HMO or the payer, thank you, that you're working with, they want to make a profit as well. So, there's got to be some give and take on both sides. Tell us a little bit about that. And if you have, without using names, an example of a big challenge that you had and how you overcame it, that would be great.
Yeah, I think, Cindy, there's probably 1,000 examples I can give. Maybe in your audience, you ask such thought-provoking questions, because it's like, oh, which one do you go to? That's what your audience is thinking right now. And everybody's got a story about this. But I think it comes down to a couple things: value and education, and they go hand in hand. If the customer doesn't understand what they're paying for, they're never going to be comfortable with having that second conversation to say, I don't think that really fits with where I'm at. And education is such a key piece, especially in an innovative space. So if you're creating a new category or you're bringing a new product in an existing category, the impetus is on the manufacturer to sell that value proposition in such a way it says clinically, this is effective. It's been validated by the agency or it wouldn't be on the market. That's the standard. But when you're having conversations around, what does that value mean to everybody in the equation, you have to build that relationship and keep it from becoming transactional. And you do that for one reason. If it's easy to say, hey, I'll give you an extra 5% off the price, the next guy can give you 6% off. And what short-term wins that you have is going to be fast, replaced by somebody else. But if they understand the value that you bring and the patient profile that you're targeting to help, I think it brings a different level of respect and value to the payer. A lot of times in the government world, there's standards that you have to meet. There's federal floors, federal ceilings. People don't eligibility requirements. There's standards that the government says your price will be in this realm. The commercial world and other areas of the business, it's a little bit different. So you're building the value prop in a different manner to each different book of business. But still, I think it comes down to the value that is placed on your product based upon the conversation, and your relationship and your trust that you built gets you to that conversation. There's a number of situations where you may or may not have a competitor in the space. Regardless of that, you still have to build your value and still have to tell the story about what you bring to the table as a manufacturer, how you're going to support that patient. How this is not just a transactional ring of the cash register. This is something you're going to build upon. And this is the category that your company is specifically specializing in. And this is how you're going to support the physicians, how you're going to support the patients. And in turn, that's going to help mitigate any kind of long-term negotiation with an insurance plan to say, it's buttoned up. They are going to do what they say they're going to do. You contractually agree to that. And instead of just making it a 20% discount, then maybe it's more in line with like a 10% discount. But at the same time, the value has to be there, real or perceived. Most times, if you get into a transactional situation, it's not going to be a long-term event for you as far as like benefiting your company or the customer.
Yeah, because the parameters are too narrow and they're not going to last, basically.
Correct. That's the way I look at it. And it's worked for 32 years. I think I'll stick with it for a little while longer.
Sounds like a good idea to me,
Yeah. That's the plan. But it's a fun job, Sindy. I mean, it's fun to see people respond and people trust what you say. And if you don't breach that trust, I think you'll win the ties, but you still got to try. You got to show that passion, that initiative, that motivation. And that's what I try to bring to the table each and every call and each and every encounter. And, if I'm not going in and making this fun and making it rewarding for all involved, I hadn't done my job. And I just don't think they get that from everybody in the field. So my advice would be to differentiate yourself. Be a strategist that builds long-term relationships and be a high performer that's focused on customer satisfaction. You never go wrong there.
Well, I think you're lined up in an industry where you have a lot that aligns with what you're doing. If I look at your resume and I see where you came from an educational perspective, your MBA is in healthcare administration. I don't have it in front of me, but healthcare administration. Thank goodness.
You got a good memory, Sindy.
And immediately you're lined up with healthcare, and healthcare is lined up with pharmaceuticals. They go hand in hand. One doesn't do well without the other. And so you have a foundation from where you're coming from that is a different driver than somebody who says to themselves, oh, well, that looks like a job that can keep me busy. And, there's lots of different elements and I get to be out in the field and I can learn a lot, but they're not really tied in. They'd really rather, if they thought about it, be in a different industry, doing a different job. And so you're coming at it probably from the same way I did from recruiting. I recruited for lots of different companies. I recruited in technology, which was fun for a while. I actually recruited actual healthcare, and that was okay too because I was hiring nurses. But, when I got to pharma, I really found my sweet spot. I could see the actual good that was happening from what I was doing. And I think that that's what your result is. Is that not true?
I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, I worked in pharma for 8 years before I went back and got the MBA and the MHA. And it was just very strategically focused on what interested me. And that's how I've kind of driven my career. And I was fortunate to start with great companies that had great training departments. And I worked for great people and had great mentors and capitalized on that. And moving through the ranks and moving into different roles and capacities, I learned different skill sets that made it easier for me to do things I wanted to, things I found interesting. Because life's a long time and the career kind of flies by. If you don't do something that you appreciate and what you feel like you're accomplishing and doing something good, I don't think it's nearly as rewarding. And that's our own fault. So we have that choice. And I wanted to make good choices and make it really just rewarding for me personally. And at the same time, you said it best, feels like you're doing something good.
Yeah, that's enough to get you out of bed in the morning for sure.
Amen. It is. But I'm glad you're doing the work you are, because this is very entertaining and educational, and it's just fun to do something a little bit different like a podcast. So thanks for doing your work.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm I love talking to people. Just was working and trying to get people to come into the company wherever I was working. It was so interesting to me to be able to hear about different roles. I learned so much. That was part of the fun for me, as well as, the win when you get a placement or whatever, you get somebody in a role. You have to learn and stay up to date on so much because Medicare changes every year. Isn't that something that you've got to keep abreast of, all the different changes?
You do. And fortunately, there's a lot of educational opportunities out there, Sindy. So it's not as hard as or as daunting as what it may seem.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it does seem daunting to me.
Yeah. Well, it could, but at the same time, you take it in small bites and just learn what you learn. And along the way, I've just been fortunate to meet so many nice people that if I have a question about something where I've just got half the information, I can call and have a pleasant conversation with a friend and get dialed into exactly becoming more of an expert on that piece that's changed. If it's legislation, if it's policy, clinical criteria, it's just nice to kind of work in terms of how do I educate myself and how do I keep things moving forward? And Medicare does have changes, but sometimes, it's not really changing at all. It's a government entity that moves very slowly, just like Medicaid and the VA DOD. Those businesses are hard to inflect upon, but once you do contract with them and they understand what you're trying to do, they're reticent to change fast because they believe in their decisions and they're really good customers to partner with, doing a lot of good things for populations that need it. Okay. But it's continuing education is the key to everybody. We just have to do that and keep challenging ourselves. And that's the way I look at that.
Absolutely. I've done podcasts with big pieces of making sure that you're a continuous learner. So glad to hear you say it as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Brad, I am so pleased that you decided to join us today and share your wealth of knowledge about what you're doing. Until I got to a pharmaceutical company, I never heard about managed markets. So, it can be a whole new concept for some folks.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm glad you had interest in it, and I hope this was helpful.
Who knows? Maybe we can have you come back and talk about some other aspects.
I would love it. Thank you very much. Thanks for considering me. I appreciate it, Sindy. Have a great afternoon.
You too, Brad.
So glad you joined us today. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like us because your ratings matter. We'll be bringing you new podcasts every 2 weeks on the first and third Wednesdays. My goal is to help you, my valued listeners, in your job search and continue to help you right on through your work life. To make that happen, though, your support is needed. By listening regularly, we can keep this going. But you can also help by sharing the podcast with your network of friends, family, and coworkers. Ask them to listen. We're on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and so many more. Not so podcast savvy? tell them they can go to listen on our website at www.insiderscareerclub.com. I appreciate your support. Stay safe and take care.